Hey everyone, welcome back. This is going to be a cover of a live video. So what had happened is we did a live today and the audio kept cutting out. We struggled through the live to fix the issue, but we were unable to. And so it's quite frustrating to have that happen during a live, and I apologize to those that were trying to listen. So what I would like to do in response is actually just go through and cover some of the topics that we went through during the live, and hopefully the audio won't die like it did during the live. So let's get started here. Now, the question came in during the live about whether I have watched Skunky Design's YouTube channel. And so I have the channel up here, and I encourage you to check out her channel. She does typically her content involves doing a deep dive on tube amplifiers, tube amplifier design, and also measurement. And so the question that I received was whether I've seen her content in regards to distortion and how she prefers to have second order harmonic distortion in the tube amps to give it that tube warmth, with the third order and fourth order as low as possible. And so to answer that question, yes, I certainly do follow Skunky's design channel, and I am pretty much in alignment with her conclusions on the topic of harmonic distortion. Now there's obviously other types of distortion where that we can get into that, but not for this video anyways. But I did want to expand upon what I have found just in my own observations between correlating the measurements of harmonic distortion with the subjective listening side. And so here you can see, actually I'll go to the preamp because it ties in with specifically with what Skunky has measured. And so the recent blog post that I had done was on the Mexing Mingda MC7R preamp. And so if you scroll through the measurements, you'll note that there really isn't any predominant second order harmonic distortion until you get into the higher outputs, where you see that coming in with the bass frequencies. But generally, this amplifier is a very low distortion, very clean preamplifier, and that it doesn't add any of that tube warmth from what I observed just with the listening impressions. Now in this blog post, if you scroll down, you can see where I actually directly compared the distortion measurements with the Dawn Sax preamp. And so this is a preamplifier where you actually do get a nice tube warmth added into the sound. And so to correlate that with the measurement side, this is the distortion profile of the Dawn Sax preamp, and you can see, and this is what I refer to as the ladder effect, where you have H2 and then H3 and then H4 kind of as a stepping ladder, where subsequently the distortion is lower and lower as you go into the higher order harmonics. Now this is an example of an electronic device that has that particular distortion characteristic, but it's also holds true from my observation with loudspeakers as well. With driver testing, I've found that drivers that exhibit this characteristic also sound preferable. They have a nice, warm, rich sound to it, where it doesn't detract from clarity either. So often the concern is that when you introduce distortion, you're affecting clarity. It's been my observation that when you're just focusing on this ladder effect, where you have the H2 predominant, then clarity does not suffer in any way. It actually ties the music together and has a much more musical sound character. To follow the line of thought with the speaker driver testing, you can see here in this particular blog post where I had done the dual flanked woofers, you'll notice again that it has the same ladder effect. And this is with the ScanSpeak woofer that has the symmetrical drive 1 motor technology, the SD1 motor technology. And you can see here again the same attribute. To further emphasize that, the blog post with the measurements of the dual CS woofers, you'll see here that if you scroll down to the bottom again, that you have that ladder effect in the distortion profile. So you can see here that as well. So that's covering that question. Now I wanted to go back and discuss when we did the live last, we were talking about various books that I've read and use, that have influenced me as far as my understanding and knowledge. And so I'm going to touch on that a bit as well. And so one of the speaker books that I encourage you to get is available from Parts Express. And so that's the Testing Loudspeakers. And I'll post a link in the description. And so this book outlines standard common practice for the various test setups for measuring loudspeakers. And so oftentimes I'll get emails with customers sending me their own acoustic measurements, and 9 times out of 10 the speaker is in the normal position in their stereo setup, 30 centimeters against the front wall, for example. And so that's a very common mistake. When you're measuring loudspeakers, what you really need to do is physically move the speaker into the middle of your space so that the reflections are as far away as possible. I'm talking sidewall, ceiling, floor reflections. And this is why you can see behind me a giant pedestal with the horn positioned in the middle of my workshop, so that the wall reflections and floor reflections are about 11 feet away. So generally speaking, very roughly, 1 millisecond is about 1 foot. And so when you're doing a gated measurement, and you might wonder what a gated measurement is, and I'll get into that in a second. But basically, you're wanting to measure just the speaker. You don't want to measure the room. And so to do that, you have to get the speaker into the middle of your space. And so, like I mentioned about 1 millisecond being 1 foot, when that speaker emits the test signal comes to the microphone, and what you want to do is shut that microphone off as soon as it receives the test signal from the speaker. And you want to gate, that's the same thing, shut off, gate the microphone signal so that it shuts off before the room reflections reach the microphone. And so if you really wanted, for measurement of tweeters, you really want to have around at least a 3 millisecond gate, so that you get the test signal, comes to the microphone, and then after that, 3 milliseconds later, the microphone shuts off. And so 3 milliseconds is about 3 feet, so that that's great for testing speakers. But when it comes to that's great for testing tweeters. But when you want to test into the mid band, then you need to get a longer delay or gate. And so in this space, it's 11 millisecond, which is about 11 feet, which allows me to get resolution down into the frequency spectrum of about 500 hertz. Okay, so when you want to get measurements below 500 hertz, then this book covers other methods to allow you to get that. And one of the methods is a ground plane measurement, where you place the speaker and the microphone directly onto the ground, and then the distance is, it spells it out in the book so that you can calculate the distance of the microphone. And so for me, I was really later than I should have been as far as getting into testing. And so by testing your loudspeaker, getting the raw driver measurements, you're actually able to do proper crossover design. And so just opens up a whole other realm for the hobby and being able to actually complete a finished speaker. And so I get a lot of emails and requests about whether I do crossover design. And really, what you should be doing as a hobbyist is trying to do the crossover design yourself. And I know it's a huge learning curve. It's very difficult, and it's not going to be something you learn in one day. It's going to, in fact, take maybe 1 or 2 years for you to kind of hone your craft. And that's what it's really all about, is improving your knowledge, improving your skill. And so the difficulty for me as a business in doing crossover design is for other individuals is that you actually have to ship the speaker to me, and I have to have the finished speaker here, whether you ship the speaker or I build a prototype. And so there's risks involved with the shipping. The crossover design is really the last leg of the development, and so it really is something that you should try to learn yourself, which is why I have the video training series on that, to walk you through the step-by-step. But outside of that, you really can try to do it yourself. And so that's with the book, it really helps you understand what is common and standard practice. And that, for example, if you want to share a picture of your test setup, you want to share your measurements on the forums or on social media, then you can have confidence in knowing that yes, a ground plane measurement is a thing, right? That it is a common thing, and it's not, you're not doing it wrong. So it just gives you that added assurance in knowing how other people do it. So the other thing too is very common with, when you publish measurements, and this is more of an issue with the REW software, which most people are using, is REW is meant for room measurement. And so out of the box, you really do have to change a lot of the settings within REW to make it for speaker measurement, not room measurement. And so you have to reduce the gate. Typically, I think the REW software, it has a standard 300 millisecond gate, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but the default settings in the software need to be changed so that you have the gating time shortened, so that you're not getting the impact of the room into your measurements. Also, another thing I believe with REW is the vertical scale should be changed to 50 dB, and then the smoothing should be changed to 24 dB smoothing. And so I'll do a video on setting up REW for loudspeaker measurement. Unfortunately, ARTA, which is what I use, it's another measurement software program. It's no longer supported, unfortunately, which is frustrating. But so I'm considering maybe changing back to REW so that hobbyists can follow the same settings and practice that I've been using. And I've been able to successfully replicate a measurement taken in ARTA. I've been able to get the exact same measurement in REW once the settings in REW was adjusted for loudspeaker measurement. So another book that I would highly recommend, and this book's expensive if you were to buy it brand new, but you can try to find it used, and which is what I did. I think I paid about $80 for this book used. I bought it online. And so this is a massive in-depth book that covers a lot of the math behind driver design, the Thiel small parameters, and it really kind of highlights both what impacts a driver's parameters, but also what doesn't impact a driver's parameters. And so I think there's a lot of misconception. I think intuitively we think we know what impacts a driver's parameters and what would make a great driver, or even what would make a great loudspeaker. But when you really break it down to the math and you understand what are the actual variables involved as far as the acoustical, mechanical parameters, it's really interesting to see what actually doesn't matter when it comes to driver design. So that's one of the things that I really kind of pulled from that book. And so that's definitely one that I would suggest picking up. The other one that we talked about during the last live was Sound Reproduction by Floyd Toole. And so this book is incredible. It's done a lot of testing, blind testing at the NRC here in Canada. And so a lot of research-based information where it's just breaking it down very objectively, but the idea here is that they have participants in a controlled environment and they're listening to a variety of speakers behind a screen, so they can't, they're not affected by bias or anything like that. And so they're just subjectively ranking the speakers. And so I think they had 3 or 4 pairs of speakers, and they each had very distinctive off-axis characteristics. One was an electrostat speaker where it was very narrow, and then they had what they called a wide coverage speaker. And so they were looking at perceived source width, perceived source envelopment. And so in order to do these surveys as far as listener preference, they had to really kind of break down the subjective description aspect. So they developed terms such as PSW, perceived source width, as far as the width of the soundstage or the depth and the envelopment aspect. And so there had to be kind of a standardization of descriptors that allows, everybody to kind of understand what's being talked about and what's being described. And so, you may have noticed in a lot of my videos that I use the same terminology because I don't want to wax poetic about various speaker attributes. And when I say one thing, it could mean something completely different to another person. Like when I say that the speaker's expressive, like, well, what's that mean, right? So the psychoacoustic aspect is covered in depth. It's just a whole world of, like I mentioned in the live video, this is really what really helped me understand in terms of loudspeaker design, what was critical in terms of how we perceive sound as humans, and how our brains process the sounds with the precedence effect. It's a fascinating kind of whole world that you can explore, and it really helps you understand, just the overall topic of sound quality. So again, this is another book that I highly recommend. And then another one would be recording studio design, and it's one that I've gone through, and there's some great sections in terms of audio home listening. There's a lot of overlap here in terms of room acoustics and the types of diffusers and creating a quiet room. Also, it covers loudspeaker monitoring and loudspeaker design. So this is just a kind of a snapshot of some of the books that I've read and have influenced me in my understanding. I can cover maybe some more in another video. So moving on from that, one of the major developments recently for us is the development of this 3rd generation multi-cell. And so I have the horn printed here, and it took 3 days to print, so you can see it here. It's I had to purchase a larger printer, which does 420 by 420 bed size. And so I actually have some test results today to show you, and this is the RCF ND950 compression driver. I've removed the adapter off the front, and now it's being used just as the 1.4 inch throat. And so I'll show you that now, the test results from this. I can tell you some of the shortcomings of the previous generation multi-cells is that the cells seem to be like multiple sources of high frequency, where you'd have a beaming at each cell as you move off axis, and when you're moving off axis and you're positioned in front of each cell, then there's like an increase in high frequency output. And that's been something that I've been trying to solve. The 2nd generation multi-cell had no horn coloration whatsoever, which was a fault of the Altec horn, one of the faults of the Altec horn that I had tested earlier. But what it exhibited was a massive dip at 5 kilohertz, which I couldn't, it was a dip at 5 kilohertz on axis. And so I'm encouraged to say that the latest 3rd gen multi-cell actually doesn't have any of those issues. So I'll just go to that for you here. I should have had it open, but okay, so here's the on-axis. Here's the on-axis raw frequency response for so this is the 1929 Gen 3 multi-cell. And so you can see here, loading at the cutoff of the horn is generally around 700 hertz. And then you see a falling response this is typical of the wide coverage type of horn. You're going to get less energy directly on axis, and that energy is being distributed off axis, which is why you're seeing this falling response. Okay, so now if we look at the off axis colored polar map, so here you can see that we're getting, and for those of you that don't know, this is the on axis, and then as you move up or down in the graph, then that's moving off axis, off. So, and then you have the frequency spectrum along the bottom. But generally, the coverage window of a system is dictated by the -6 dB down point. So you can see here, that's going to be around the yellow or green area. And so you can see in the graph here, we're around 120 degree listening window. So 60 times 2 is giving you over 120 degree listening window across most of the spectrum. But there is a bit of a narrowing there through the mid-band, but I'm not too concerned about that. What I want to see is nice wide coverage even into the upper treble. Now, to contrast this result, I wanted to show the end result on the Alltech horn that I had tested earlier. I'm just going to see, I'm going to search here on my blog there. This is it here. So it was the Alltech 805B multi-cell. And so this is just going to highlight the issues that I discovered. And you can see here kind of the fingering effect where you have this intensity changing depending on whether you're in front of each cell. So this is something that I found with the second generation multi-cell that I developed, but you can see from the test results from earlier today that it doesn't have that. Now, what I did was do a high pass just to see what was required to kind of flatten the response. And so this is shown with a 2.2 microfarad in capacitor here. So the green is with the capacitor, and then the red is the raw response. So you can see, so this is, I did a kind of a short listening session of just the horn, and I can confirm that it sounds really, really good. I'll bring up the 3D CAD model here so you can see it. I believe it's here. And so let me just suppress these two mirror features because I'll get to that in a second. So SolidWorks is gonna chunk away here. Oh, I think I gotta bring it back up. I might have destroyed my model. So the point of bringing this up is that you can see here, this is with the kind of the potato masher, and there's a lot to be improved in this area. And so we can 3D print this to be even sharper so that there's going to be less reflection, first order reflections back down the throat. And so the result that I'm seeing here is promising in the sense that it's free of anything severe as far as deep frequency response notches and that. So to me, as far as subjectively and then with the measurements, we've achieved the design target. And so from here, it's simply improving it further by finessing the design, with small changes. Okay, so that's another frequency response measurement that I can show you. This is the 0, 15, 30, and 45 degrees off axis. So this is another measurement that I typically show. So you can see here that it's fairly consistent and it doesn't change too much as you move off axis, which is nice to see. Again, this is with the 50 dB vertical and 24 dB smoothing. So another area that I wanted to cover, actually, the multi-cell has a number of Okay, here it is there. It's just a little bit slow because I'm recording and trying to do SolidWorks at the same time. So this is what I wanted to show you, just with how everything concentrates into a single area. But if I move back, one of the discoveries that I made while modeling it is that you can actually make it look pretty cool by, this is kind of earlier in the feature tree in SolidWorks. So this cell is kind of the outer cell that's creating sound at that kind of 60 degrees off axis. But then it just continues with this design motif. And so it was just one of those things where as I'm modeling, I'm looking at it and thinking, man, that looks cool. That it would just look amazing sitting on top of a speaker. And if this was cast, bronze with like a patina to it, I think it would look quite incredible. So the other, and sorry to be wandering all over, but this, like I mentioned, is from a live that we did where we were answering questions. And so the Nighthawk is a project that we're going to be starting a build for a customer. And so this would be I believe it's Gen 4. I said Gen 3 in the live stream, but this is actually Gen 4, the fourth kind of iteration of the Nighthawk. And so the big distinction with this latest gen is the change from slot loaded open baffle, or SLOB. It was using 15-inch open baffle woofers, and so with this latest version we're using bass reflex. And so the bass drivers, it's just going to take a second there, I just clicked on it, is the Dayton Audio RSS 315 high output subwoofer, and it's on the sides are the matching passive radiators, and then they just vent through this solid hardwood CNC machined vents. And so there's a lower and an upper bass module that are basically identical. They're going to play up to around 120 hertz. And on the back, and it's not shown but is concealed completely inside the speaker, is the Hypex FA 501 plate amp, which with a 4 ohm load produces 500 watts. So with the 2 amps, it's going to be 1,000 watts per side. And so that's just for the bass. And so this version of Nighthawk is going to be active on the bass only, and then passive for the mid and high frequency. The compression drive, the high frequency has changed from the pure ribbon tweeter from Viawave. It's going to be a 1-inch compression driver. And so the crossover is going to be housed in this central tube. The crossover is extremely simple, and so it allows us to have, to fit it in that small physical space. So the other design element is this rear cover that conceals the wiring. And then if you don't know the Hypex amp that we're using, it has preset programs that you can, so you remove these covers and it allows access to the back of the plate amp. And so it has, we're going to do presets for various DSP settings for the customer. So there's an upper and lower plate amp that you can access, and there's also the volume knob of the bass, the overall level of the bass that can be adjusted. Okay, and so for this particular order, I am traveling and doing an on-site setup where I'm going to use my microphone to calibrate according to the room and do kind of full DSP and EQ correction based on the customer's room. So I'll spend a day or two listening to music, measurement, and then consulting with the customer on, overall listening impressions and preferences, and adjusting for example, age-related hearing loss, and whether there needs to be a slight increase in the upper treble to kind of compensate for that. So that's kind of like the last kind of leg in getting what I would consider the ultimate, is also consulting on site with the customer to get to that level of musical or to listening preference. Okay, so just continuing on with the design changes, these legs in the previous design were bent 3/16 thick or 4.7 millimeter thick mild steel which continued down, and then it had screws kind of at the front that secured it to the base plinth. This design has changed in that it uses cast aluminum legs, so the 4 legs are the same, and so it uses a 10 millimeter wall, and you can see there it's very substantial looking, and so I think it really just suits the overall aesthetic of the speaker, and that it has kind of a beefy masculine look to it. So that's where we're at. We're almost finished, kind of like sign off on the design, and then we'll be starting on the build, which was going to take 2 or 3 months. So that's it for that. Let me just make sure I've covered off. I was asked about what my favorite drivers are, either full range or compression drivers. For those of you that have been following for quite a while, you'll know that the B&C DCM 50 driver, I've mentioned it just recently, and it's a great driver, but I won't get too much into that because you've already heard that. Another compression driver that's really good is the SB Audience 65 CDNT, and so that's a titanium compression driver, 2.5-inch voice coil, and again we use that even on the open baffle speakers that you can see there, and that's kind of generally known to those that have been following my channel. But outside of that, and in particular when it comes to affordable drivers, perhaps maybe in the full range side, a driver that is probably worth, a couple drivers that are worth mentioning would be, and when I mention sound quality from drivers, it always has to be in the context of what horn is it being used with, because the combination of the two can really come together to make something truly special, and on its own, the driver actually could not actually sound that great, and so that's something that I just want to preface before I get into this. So I gotta actually find so one that really has kind of stood out, maybe underappreciated, that never really took off as far as designs that I've introduced. Now we did do 2 pairs of these in solid walnut, and they sold, and the customers are really happy. So I actually don't even have these shallow horn 1928. It uses the Fostex FF85WK. Why is this so special? Well, when it comes to full range drivers, often the challenge or compromise that you're making is that you're dealing with breakup in the treble. And so that's a compromise. And so with this particular driver, because it's so small, the breakup is actually around 18 or 19 kilohertz, so well outside the audible band. And so you end up with a really sweet, detailed sound with great clarity in the upper treble. The challenge being is that it's a small driver, and so you really have limited maximum SPL. However, with the shallow horn, you're actually able to get a significant boost kind of in that lower mid band. And so by adding the EQ to the kind of the transfer function of the horn, you're able to get pretty decent output out of this kind of combination. And the horn is giving you loading down to around, I think it's around 100. If you look at the measurements here, you're getting loading, so you can see here, loading, you'd use a shallow crossover point, and I would say maybe around a 300 hertz crossover point supplement, so you'd have to have it with a bass cabinet. But with the transfer, you see the raw frequency response there in red, and then you add in the EQ and the high pass filter, and then you bring in a bass cabinet. You are covering 90% of the vocal range with basically what's point source, and so that's the clear advantage there. So this is a product that I think has been underappreciated. Now, the larger 3D printer that I bought, like I mentioned, it has a 420 by 420 print bed, and so this horn is 400 by 400 on the horn mouth. And so if there is some interest there, if you want me to 3D print a version of this on the printer, then let me know. Another driver that gets honorable mention in the category of, affordable is the Fostex FE108NS. And so and again, just to emphasize, this driver on its own in a small bass reflex enclosure, it doesn't sound that great. But when you put it in this backloaded horn wide baffle, it just completely transforms the driver's sound quality. And so this is backloaded horn 2314. And so this is not on my site. It was just a test, an experiment that I had done. I had used them in my listening room for quite a while. I know I don't even have these cabinets anymore. I had sent them to a customer, and then the customer really fell in love with them, and I had lent them to a customer as a stand-in while he waited for his other speakers. And so the customer loved them so much that he ended up buying them off of me. So we plan on actually remaking these, even if they're just prototype enclosures, because I personally miss them. I want them back, to have them, to occasionally kind of put into my system and listen to. So that's another one. And I think I might just offer this on my site, as a plan set that you can download. It's a very simple and easy build. Okay, so moving on from that, I was asked about the speakers behind me. So you can see there, those are going to be assembled this week. It's the 1695 open baffle speaker. So those are a customer's actually coming this Friday to pick them up. So we really got to get cracking on making those, getting them finished. And so I just yesterday finished them on the CNC. So those are solid cherry. And so they're going to get the Rubio finish. And then the other project there, you can see it there. That's the 2118 mid bass horn. And so I can talk about that a little bit. So this is a design and build commission for a customer in Los Angeles. And so it's using this 10-inch 18 sound driver. You can see it here. Now, I had used this driver in a previous blog post where I had mounted it into a 200 hertz horn, and I just face mounted it into the horn. I didn't have a phase plug or anything like that, and it produced very low distortion and had great kind of immediacy and dynamics, kind of in that 200 up to 1 kilohertz frequency range. Above 1 kilohertz, it started to sound colored because I didn't have any kind of a phase plug, so there was quite a bit of reflection occurring kind of in the void formed by the front of the driver. And so this 2118 speaker project, it covers from about 150 hertz up. So let me just be clear. With the phase plug, this project uses a phase plug. In fact, I've completely designed a compression driver, and I have it here. Oh my goodness. So here's basically a giant compression driver that's been 3D printed, and you can see there the veins of the phase plug. It's got a radial phase plug. And so inside of this is this 10-inch driver. So it's a continuation of the test that I mentioned earlier with the 200 hertz horn. Sorry, my chair's squeaking there. So this 2118 project takes the 10-inch, makes it a compression driver. It actually is clean up to 5 kilohertz. And so the particular, I'll pull it up on my site here so you can see it. So it's the 10 MBA 520 10-inch mid-range from 18 Sound. And so one thing I didn't mention here is you can see the input terminals on the driver, and then you have the tinsel wire inside there that goes to the voice coil. You also have an additional set of wires coming off and then going into the back of the driver, and it's actually a separate coil on the pole piece that reduces the inductive rise of the driver. And so if you look here, this is the spec published by 18 Sound. You can see it has a very flat impedance curve. And so Normally what you would see is that as the impedance drops down, it immediately starts to go back up, and that's called inductive rise. And so 18 sound has been able to completely eliminate that rise, and so there's going to, as a result, there's going to be lower distortion. Okay, and so that's what we're doing here. We're taking an excellent, very low QTS driver and horn loading it. Now for this specific project, the driver is not going to be covering up to 5 kilohertz. In fact, right directly above it is going to be the ES450 biradial coming in at around 600 hertz. Okay, so this mid-bass horn is only covering from about 150 up to 600 hertz. So just, it's part of a 4-way system. So, but the goal here is just extremely low distortion, not just by using a 10-inch and with a phase plug, but also with the low distortion offered by the specific driver that we're using. And that was proved out in this test that we did about a year ago. So you can see when you actually did the distortion measurements, it was extremely low intermodulation distortion, and as a result we were getting excellent sound quality. So okay, so we covered off that. Another thing that I wanted to touch on was I am now offering on my site a DIY version of the 1695 open baffle. So if you're on my site and you just search 1695, you can see here I now offer a DIY version of this 1695. So the plan set is called 2812, and you can see there it's based on, so there's a number of options with this plan set. So I can include the crossover components, I can also include the drivers, and I can also include the 3D printed horn. And so you can see here the regular manual woodworking baffle, and then the 3D printed horn gets installed. Now, I mentioned during the live that I wouldn't expect somebody to just put the 3D printed part in the horn as a bare unfinished part. There are a number of options for finishing 3D printed parts, and in that you can add a number of coats of primer and then sanding. You can do acetone bake where it sprays. You can buy these little enclosures where it sprays a mist of acetone and kind of smooths the surface texture of the 3D printed part. I've never done that, but it exists, so if you want, you can definitely check that out. So there, offering, to DIY enthusiasts the opportunity to be able to build the 1695 open baffle. Now I should mention as well, the standard thickness of the baffle in the drawings is 18 millimeter, but I've done the drawings in a way that if you want to increase the thickness of your baffle, then all of the dimensions stay the same. The angles are the same, the cuts are all the same. It's just, you just use thicker material. Now, having said that, there is a step there on the 3D printed part. So if you end up buying the plans and you are going with a thicker baffle, then let me know and I can send you an updated STL file of the horn itself that takes into account the thickness of the baffle that you've decided to go with. Okay, so there's that. Just seeing if there's anything else here. I think I covered it all. This is one take, no editing. So yeah, we'll continue to do the lives. We've got a new camera. We had some audio issues, which was related to OBS Studio. I had to completely reinstall that screen capture software. So yeah, I'll do a live hopefully every 1 to 2 weeks, and then include my twin brother there just for support during the live and getting his take and conversation on that, which is appreciated. So that's it for today. Take care and have a great day.